back in the first part of the directory for catechesis, we discovered that all of us are called to catechise by virtue of our baptism. But who are we called to catechise? Well, to answer that question, the directory now points once again to the fact of our baptism. Baptism, as we've seen, gives each of us a share in the Church's mission of evangelisation, of which catechesis is a part. But, more fundamentally, baptism is what enters us into a personal relationship with Jesus Christ through his Church, which needs to be nurtured and deepened. The process of having one's personal relationship with Jesus nurtured and deepened is catechesis, and therefore every single baptised person is called not only to catechise, but also to be catechised. The directory goes so far as to call this a right to catechesis. We read that every one of the baptised called to the maturity of faith has the right to adequate catechesis. Now, we heard a mention of this right to catechesis earlier on in the second part of the directory, in the context of the Catechism of the Catholic Church, which was described as a clear and dependable response to the legitimate right of all the baptised to have access to the content of the faith. Catechesis is for everybody, because the gospel is for everybody. Once we've heard that initial proclamation of the gospel and been incorporated into the body of Christ, the Church, in baptism, it is only right that this faith we have be allowed to mature, as the directory puts it. The directory encourages us to think about this right to catechesis in a personal way, rather than an abstract way. Of course, we're all very happy with the idea of the gospel being for everybody, but the directory reminds us that the gospel is not intended for humanity in the abstract, but for each human being. So, in order for the gospel to truly be for everybody, we need to take into account people's specific needs and circumstances. We need to think through how we can adapt our catechesis to the people we are called to catechise, so that each baptised person can reach that maturity of faith the directory speaks of. For this reason, the directory encourages us to offer pathways of catechesis that vary based on the participants' different needs, ages, and states of life. Having said this, the directory then goes on to outline some of the ways in which catechesis might be adapted based on these different needs, ages, and states of life. Firstly, it talks about catechesis in the context of family life. It describes family life as the natural place in which faith can be lived in a simple and spontaneous manner. It's a place in which parents and grandparents can witness to, accompany, and teach their children in order to deepen their relationship with Jesus Christ. The directory then talks of the specific needs of children, adolescents, and young adults. It points out that children have a desire to question and an ability to wonder and to rejoice that our catechesis is called to nurture and develop. Adolescents are in a time of life marked by a drive for independence and a search for freedom, which requires strong and reliable role models in the faith. Then we have young adults, who are at a time of life when it is common to fall away from the Church, but which is also marked by a search for meaning in life and solidarity with others. The directory then goes on to talk about the Catechesis of Elderly people. For people approaching the end of their lives, catechesis can be the bringing to fulfilment of a journey of faith in thanksgiving and hope. Or it may instead be a time of awakening of faith after many years of indifference to it. Next, the directory considers the catechesis of people with disabilities. The directory recognises that disability is no barrier to a life of Christian discipleship, and that people with disabilities enrich their parish communities by their life and witness. As such, it is vital to find ways to include people with disabilities in catechesis, especially in cultures and societies where the intrinsic dignity and value of people with disabilities is not fully recognised. Finally, the directory looks at the catechesis of migrants, refugees, and of people on the margins of society. It emphasises that the Church is, in the words of Pope Francis, a mother without boundaries and without borders, who freely shares the gift of faith. It describes the catechesis of migrants and refugees as a catechesis that sustains trust in the closeness and providence of the Father, so that their life's journey can be guided by the light of faith. It also talks of other groups of individuals on the margins of society, such as prisoners, where catechesis is called to emphasise the gift of forgiveness and liberation, which is at the heart of the gospel message. So, what have we learnt from this chapter of the directory? We've seen that baptism gives each of us not only a calling to be a catechist, but also a right to be catechised. Having entered into a personal relationship with Jesus Christ in baptism, we now have a right to the maturity of faith that comes with being catechised. This catechesis needs to be adapted to the particular needs, ages, and states of life of the people being catechised. And the directory gives us a few examples of different groups of people within the Church where catechesis can and should be adapted to their particular circumstances and needs. For instance, families, children and young adults, people who are elderly, people with disabilities, migrants and refugees, and those who are at the margins of society, such as prisoners. This brings us to the end of the second part of the directory for catechesis. In this part, we looked at the process of catechesis. The third and final part of the directory is all about catechesis in the particular churches.